Let's go further. Okay, we're in Kuntres Umaayon. I hope Yitzi. I don't know if you downloaded the source sheets, but it's they have a link to it there. Okay, let's start now. We're in Kuntres Umaayon, the Bereshab, and we're actually in Perek Gimel. He discusses different tanugim. He discusses the idea of running after a tanug as a shtus, to tanug of Olam Hazeh, the tanug of eating, and even they discusses even tanugim of music, etc. Finally, he says in Perek Gimel, "Hinei lemala mikol tanugim anal," where it's a tanug of a machal orev, of the guf, which is totally animalistic, or even the idea of beautiful music, etc. Etc. Even the tainug of being a nice guy. There's the tainug shebeseichel v'chochma. What does that mean? When you innovate, you have a new insight, a new haskalah, the pleasure you have with creative thinking. It's an unbelievable pleasure. I can attest to that. Not only if you when you're creative, even when you have profound understanding and insight. You chop something, you suddenly grasp something which is complex, or you understand something clearly. So he points out that the big time, the super tainig is creativity and innovation. But obviously there's the tainig asag and havana. This is the good, this is the time that we should be looking for. We're in Kuntres Umaayon Perek Gimel again. But this is the time we should be looking for. We're taking for granted that the chokhmah or doing something is something positive and is ultimately true. If the chokhmah is a bad chokhmah, for example, you want to know how to destroy things and not do evil things, there's also a chokhmah that. No, we're not talking about something which is not positive, which is negative, whether it's avodah zarah, whether it's shofim, whether it's different violence, etc. These are things which are obviously that we're not talking about. We're talking about a tainug which is mutter, okay? Therefore, and man, since he is the chosen of all of created, so instead of looking for animal instincts of enjoying his sensuous pleasures, as the Rambam debates it terribly, in Mer Nevuchim, saying that is the animal aspect of man looking for sensuous pleasures, or even the pleasure of feeling like you're a good boy, you feel good about yourself, but that is not what you're looking for. What you should be looking for is the tainug in Havana and Askola and Dvarim Ruchnim. Ufrat b'inyanei chachma. You should have tainug in mitzvahs. Yes, we know there's an idea of tainug in mitzvahs. There's an idea of tainug of the shvisa of Shabbos. We discussed this when I was in America. That the Rishonim write. Who says this? Rabbeinu Hillel in the Sifri writes, "And Yom Simchaschem Ela Shabbosais." State in Rabbeinu Hillel. That's Rabbeinu Hillel Miroimi. He says over there, "What does it mean? B'simchaschem yitchatem b'chatzois." Is that the Sifri? Yom Simchaschem Ela Shabbosais. Why? Because Shabbos from mitzvah and simcha and on tainuk. He learns like Shushitas Abahag. There's a mitzvah of simcha on Shabbos. Okay, the ikar simcha is because the korbanos musaf. Because of the karbonis of Yom Tov. We discussed that in Shir in Los Angeles. But that is the reason of tainug. People think that tainug is the mitzvah of tainug. No, the tainug is an expression of your simcha. You feel fulfilled, and therefore you also want to have a pleasurable experience in that fulfillment. It's not yismachu and the chot and the kishka and the kugel. It's yismachu b'chuscha. What does yismachu b'chuscha mean? State in Rambam, Perek Ches, Uchas Lulev. What is the simcha, which is called avodas Hashem? Sameach b'mitzveisu b'kel shetziva u'ba'avas hakel shetziva oisam. You feel fulfilled with the love that you have for God that commanded you these mitzvahs. The God commander of mitzvahs, that is called the Malchus HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do I know that the God commander of mitzvahs is Malchus HaKadosh Baruch Hu? That's another mechil. it's written as a statement. And so the Bible says, well, you have to tell me he's God. We know we met him in Egypt already. We know about that. So he's the Mechiltas Moshe Lamelech. It's the example of a king, Shekovash Medina, that he captured a city state. And his Avadim, his servants, told him, well, now Gzar Aleim Gzeras, you should decree decrees. Amar Lahem, Imikablim, Kodim Yikabus Malchusi. First, they should accept on their own will my authority and my subservience to me. Sheim ein mikablim malchusi, because if they don't accept my malchus, mitzvosai, zeroisai, heich mekayim. How do you really think they can possibly succeed in fulfilling my decrees? The Mechilta said there's no way we can be religiously consistent without Kabbalah's oil malchus shamayim, and that's why the pasuk says first, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am God the Lord, that you met already in Egypt. If you accept that, now I'm going to tell you my first commandment. It's a mefurish v'chilta that why don't we succeed in our consistency in our religious life? Because we lack Kabbalah's Ol Malchus Shamayim. It's very simple. Shivisa Hashem L'Negdi Summit is one of those Ramahs that we don't fulfill too well. And that would be an understatement. So this is what we have in front of us. We have in front of us an idea that this is the mitzvah of Yismachu b'malchuscha, be sameach with avos hakel, shetziva es mitzvahs, which is called in the malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. That's the simcha of Shabbos, and that's the tainug of Shabbos. The tainug of Shabbos is what? Just like in order to attain a spiritual dimension, the prophets needed pleasure, but the pleasure was not an end, it was a medium. It was the medium of relaxation. That's why it's important to go for vacation sometimes, Sometimes you have to go with your wife separately on vacation in order to focus on each other. So you have to have a relaxed atmosphere. You can't always have the noise around you. So Yitzchak Avinu, in order to focus, to give the brachas with Nevuah, he had to have a dinner. He told Esau, give me a dinner. I never understood. It's very clear to me they didn't have very developed taste buds, because he was supposed to get venison. He was supposed to get something from wild animal caught. And his son bought him nothing more than a bunch of the goat meat. And he didn't discern, didn't know the difference. You realize that? That means he just needed the pleasure of eating, but not that he had it's very clear he didn't have he wasn't into food that much, because he didn't know the difference. I would know the difference. He didn't know the difference. He says, God made this, I caught this easily. Brother dear, goats you don't have to catch, they're in the pen. Okay, but the clown is he wanted a tainug of achila, although he wasn't very, very developed in tainug, would seem to be, but he needed a tainug of achila in order to get the Ruach HaKodesh to give the bracha. Similarly, the Rambam brings down the Psukim Yeshayahu that the Bnei Nevi'im would sit with musical instruments in front of the Nevi'im in order to get them the pleasure and the relaxation, allowing them to meditate and do Nevuah. But the Bnei HaNevi'im would sit in front of the Nevi'im. This is a Rambam of Perek Zayin, for them to relax and meditate. So this is the din of Ta'anik Shabbos. Ta'anik Shabbos doesn't mean you sit by the Kiddush and you eat your herring and your kichel over there and you tell jokes. Ta'anik Shabbos is an Ta'anik in order to be sameach in the malchus of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I wonder how many really fulfill Einik Shabbos and Simcha Shabbos the way it's brought down in Rambam. I guess we like Rambam for certain parts, but not like other parts. This is what we have to know. So this is the idea of a tainug. A tainug amiti is a medium. It's a medium to attain higher. And this is what he says. He basically says, Adam shubchir anivin surface atoy va'atanik shelo. That's what should be your tainug. Your pleasure should be ultimately in the avon of asaga enough, yes, or in the gashmis, which will lead to it. I'm adding that point. Befrat being an chachma, specifically, it comes with understanding. This we have to understand. Rabbi Avram Nahar writes in the Dorim, that's the Rabbi Avram of Provence, a big commentary on Rashi. He writes that although the din is mitzvahs lavla and not nitnu, the man makes a neder that he won't have a noah from a lulav. Can he be noitel that lulav? or an esrog can be noitel that esrog. The Gemara says mitzvah lav has nothing to do. Doing a mitzvah is not pleasure. Interesting, very not contemporary. Rashi writes, why? The mitzvahs nitnu la'oil. You're there to fulfill your yoke, your obligation. One does mitzvahs because there's an obligation. You must love that sense of subservience which obligates you. That's the idea. You love the fact that you can express your subservience to God. That's the pleasure you should be having, not the pleasure of I feel high, or I feel enraptured in the love of God by putting on a rainbow talus, etc., etc. That is not what we're talking about over here. So, Amela, we understand that but the Rabbeinu Rav Amnah said there's one mitzvah which mitzvahs lehenes nidu. What is the mitzvah shelehenes nidu? He says that's limud haTorah. Limud haTorah, he writes before that part of learning is pleasure, because you can't really. What drives a person to deeper understanding, to creativity, to the fact that you can sit down, plunk down in the weird hours, or that you can. You can learn extensively an easy 6 to 8 hours Seder without break. I was introduced to that from my Rebbe Reb Zistel. We used to have the minimum was a 6 hour stretch with no smoking breaks in the middle. That people don't know what it means anymore. The 6 hours was a minimum. That's the way it went. You had water. That's about it. And you know what happens then? He said the only way you could do that if you have pleasure. The pleasure is needed as part of the mitzvah, because to learn in that way, you have to enjoy. It's a big yesod in chinuch. I think that's the goal of every yeshiva, to instill a love of the discipline and a sense of independence, which allows you to feel comfortable with the text, and you can see the pop-outs, the questions, and the possibilities coming out of the text. You feel pleasure. You feel a sense of you can do something. I mean, many people don't go near a Gemara because it's every time you open it, you feel bad, or you can't translate it, or you don't know what's happening, etc. So that's when they start learning Mishnah Berurah or something like that, because that's easier. But the klal is that you need tainuk. So this is what he says: the ikar of Adam. You should have tainuk b'dvarim ruchnim v'dvat b'yanei hachachma, because in chachma that tainuk is good for the mitzvah. Ubazeh dafka ya'onig nafshe. This is where you should have pleasure. Kizo ma'aloseh hakol nivraim. This is the unique station of the nivra of the Homo sapien of all other creations. Ba'seichel shenitnuloi. What is unique about you, the Homo sapien? Why do you have a brain which is so much bigger than the Neanderthal? Why are you capable of thinking transcendent thoughts and abstract ideas? It's very clear, because that's what you're there for. Otherwise, why would you have that capability? Spending your time, with great respect, in numbers and in temporal realities. I mean, the animal does the same thing: food, clothing, and shelter. You have the capability of transcendent thought, of abstract thought. So what do we do? When are you using that? That is what you should be doing. Because that's what you are. That's what the great evolver created you for that. Your nefesh, your sense of existence, primarily is one of intellect. In other words, one must understand, one must define you from your throat up, but from your chachma. That's how we should be defined. That we live nebuch in a terrible society, which defines by people by other orientations or whatever it be, which have to do with tainuk. It's a decrepit society which defines the Homo sapien according to where he finds his or her pleasures. That's what we are. This is totally animalistic. This is saying that we're cutting the head off. We're looking from wherever being down. They should wear their gartel taka by their neck, okay? Because that's what it looks like. They cut off the head from the rest of the body. We have to know that's the ikar. That's who you are. Now, what does that mean? He's referring to that which the Tanya writes in the name of Chaim Vital. Every person has two nefashot, equals two properties which create his existence, two life properties. One is called nefesh elokis. It is the godly senses of what you will commonly know as chelik elokam imal. That's called tselem elokim. Where is that found? So if you open up the Yiratzon before the Tefillin, I suggest you read it once in the Siddur. Before Tefillin, there's a Tefillah there. So it says there, I'm putting on Tefillin Shirosh the Shabbat es haneshama shebemoichi. Did you ever hear that before? The neshama found in my mind. Now, it's not found anywhere. The neshama doesn't take space. What does it mean, the neshama in my mind? It's expressed primarily in my thinking process. My capability of transcendent thought, of abstract thought, of looking for purpose, not just for pleasure, that is found there. We talk about the mind, when we talk about the heart, so in medieval speech, or even before medieval, the language there would be, the heart is always that of emotion, right? Although it's actually nothing more than a pump. But it's a pump which it comes to serious expression when you get excited over something. Therefore, obviously your pulse will start racing, and you need more oxygen to your brain. That's why the heart was seen as emotion. Broken heart, holy heart, whatever these things are, the different heart things, okay? So we're talking about the Shabbos HaMashamash B'moichi, because the Nefesh Elokis, Iker Mishkan, the Nefesh Elokis, steht in Tanya, name of Chaim Vital, is B'moyach. That's where you're expressed, your real sense of self as a godly being. Your chelik v'yipach ba'apoy nishmas chayim. That is the neshama shebemoichecha, the capability of what you call tzelem elokim. The Chaim Volozhiner discusses this at length at the end of Shar Aleph with the big agoras of the sun. Tzelem elokim, Rambam also writes this in is that capability of thought, of abstract thought, of meaning and purpose, which other animals don't have. That's in your moyach. The nefesh habahamis is that which we share together with all other nefesh chaya. You must remember that when God said, nefesh chaya lemina, what does it mean? Animals. Now the Sephorah writes that also human beings were created then. What you have is called the Neanderthals. At different parts of the evolutionary process, they all came out in that same Friday when God said, nefesh chaya lemina. Then afterwards, the Sephorah writes, he took a certain one of those people, what you call the Adam, and he said, let's blow into him a nefesh elokis v'yipach be'apay nishmas chai. You know, so there's two things. Yes, there was the Neanderthal. He was created, but he didn't have a tzelem elokim. He didn't have a nefesh elokis. He only has a nefesh habahamis. The Adam, which is found in Bereshis, is the Adam which afterwards he took this Neanderthal, v'yipach be'apay nishmas chayim, and he made him into what you would call a Homo sapien. Okay, I want you to understand. I suggest you read the Sephorah there. It's a very important thing to know that there were all types of what you call people prior to outside of the man which God took to blow into, to inhale in him a nefesh elokis. It's a very important piece which they would teach us to people when they were young. Okay, so this is what he says over here. That's the nefesh elokis shebayishii mebchinas hachachma elyoina kiyadua. Because what is the nefesh elokis? The nefesh elokis is, as we said, nefesh b'moichi. Its primary expression is intellect. Where does intellect come from? It's an expression of God's intellect, mitzumtzam, and rather constricted and put into a certain spiritual form of intellectual capability. This comes from the chachma elyoina elokis. V'tzorach li is kol hamshachas nafshay v'cheftzay magmasay be'esik chachmas hatayra. If your nefesh elokis would be predominant, then that's all you would want, because that's what the nefesh elokis wants. It wants godliness. It sees this world as nothing more as a place to explore godliness. That's what it is. It's like Stanley and Livingston. You know what I mean? You say, wow, okay. You see, oh, Dr. Livingston, I presume. You came to this world to see godliness by the Lilliputs. You came to see godliness in the lowest places possible, and yet godliness is there. That's what the nefesh elokis does. And that's what you should be drawn to. What you're naturally drawn to, umagmasay, and your purpose, the asik chachmas hatayra. The asik of chachmas hatayra. Does that have to mean you're in koilel all day? Not at all. It means to say, what are you drawn to? Obviously, there's a passage of saptat ganechas yirosh chavitzarecha. What are you drawn to? You're drawn to chachmas hatayra. What does chachmas hatayra mean? It means to say, when I look into a leaf, I see wisdom, and I understand this wisdom is expressed in the Torah. It's primarily if you look for the metaphysical truth, but the fact of the matter is that the Ramban writes in the Akdama al Torah that all chachmas are written in the Torah. Ramban says, Hadish Shlomo HaMelech learned Sichas Dekalim, V'sifas Oifos. He saw it in the Torah. The Ramban explicitly writes that all disciplines are all, if those who read and know and understand, can learn it somehow in the Torah. No, and that doesn't mean to say you can become a neurosurgeon from learning Chulin. It's not going to happen. No. You need a certain siyata d'shmai. For example, the Ramban writes that how did Yecheskel know the prophecy of the Merkava? Or how did Elihu, in the book of Iyov, know the different sides of Hashgacha Elyon? He also saw it in the Torah. Well, we know that Yecheskel saw something that Yeshayahu didn't see. He saw an elaborate Merkava, and Yeshayahu only saw like 4 psukim. And the answer is each person in his generation is capable of seeing insights in Torah, which from there you can see broad things, and through prophecy or through Shaita D'Shmai, you can thus see so many different things. But one has to get something very important here. All disciplines, Shorsham b'chachmas HaTorah. That doesn't mean you make a Birchas HaTorah when you do physics. No, Birchas HaTorah is specific on the specific chachma, which is clear. But one has to get this very important to understand. This idea of Torah or Mada is not a modern day reality. The Mada, according to the Ramban, is Shorsha b'chachmas HaTorah. It's a big yesod. I wish people would understand that, and they would have a religious experience by learning Mada and hoping to find somehow in Torah one day. But what can we do? God should help. We should be able to educate people. So again, he says, Kol chachamav tzad megmos be'esik ha'chachmas HaTorah. The Rambam writes in Pirkei Avos, when the Mishnah says Shloisha sheyachlu b'shulchan echad ve'en b'nein divrei Torah, 3 people eat together, and the natural conversation between them is not divrei Torah. It's as if they're eating a sacrifice of paganism. Kilo ochlum mizivchei mesim. So the Rambam says 2 important things. First, he says it doesn't mean you say abort at the meal. That's meaningless. It means that we're describing what is your natural conversation, your hak, as we say, right? What do you talk about when you get together? You're sitting alone, your wife on Shabbos. So it says you should have intelligent conversation. That should be the natural self. Because what does Torah mean? He says, Lav dafka babakama. It doesn't mean a word in the pasha. But avas ha-chochma means morals, ethics, philosophy, things which are intelligent. But avas ha-chochma. I'll never forget. I was once stuck in London. When it snows in London, even 2 inches, the place goes down. So I remember the Eitan, you're laughing. Yeah, Zaygatus, they're not used to it. I'm from Chicago, you understand. You need 2 feet of snow before anything closes. But over there, 2 inches and it's finished. And the El Al canceled. Finally, got to Heathrow. I got stuck. Thank God it was in the lounge. Who did I meet in the lounge? I'll never forget. There's a young man. He's married. He's called Rafi Stemmer. I say, Rafi, we're stuck in the lounge together. He was going to go, I think, to wherever yeshiva. I said, do me a favor. Tell me something intelligent. So he talked to me about the molecular structure of crystals, and I enjoyed it tremendously. We had a great conversation. That was called Avos HaChachma. He ended up being my student in Karen B'Avna. What can I do? But because it got stuck in the snow in the lounge over there. But that's what Avos HaChachma is, a natural conversation of intelligence. Because there you finally say at the end of the conversation, Ma Rabu Masech Hashem Kulam B'Chachma Asisa Mala Otzki Yanacha. That's how you're supposed to learn your sciences. That's Avos HaChachma. Okay? So that's when he said, obviously, Ikar B'Chachmas HaTorah, but I'm going to add in that, it means also call the Chachmas, because all Chachmas are part of Chachmas HaTorah, if it's done with the purpose of Ma Rabu Masech Hashem Kulam B'Chachma Asisa. Ubezet Tisaneg Nafsho. And that's what you should have pleasure from. Thus you elevate yourself. The last 4 words are the most important. Asher lekach univra. You were created in order to think, in order to look world around you and think. Very, very, very Darwinian. Yes, everything has a purpose. Everything has a purpose. But Tachlis Kol Davar, the end result of it all, Hu Kishoilu Lamali Madreges Hatzmo. You know how something attains its purpose when it goes above itself. For example, Himo, What is the goal of vegetation? It's when it leaves vegetation is incorporated in live being. When the animal eats the grass has attained its purpose. The grass being there is the ultimate graduation of grass when the grass becomes chai. And what the ultimate goal of animal, what is the ilui of animal, v'tachas achai, hugshenichlo b'medaber. Yes, when the energy is found in the earth, which are now created into the grass, which sounds like chadgadya, and from the grass into the animal, and that finally energizes you. And what's the purpose of energizing you? Also going above yourself. Kasher rucho ola lamala. When your ruach, your spiritual sense of self, goes beyond your body, beyond your physical capabilities, it goes higher than that. You attain a higher level. You're doing things more than just the sensuous self. For example, when you learn Torah, which is the Chachma and the will of God, and we also know this is elaborated in Tanya. Let me explain what this means in a nutshell. When I say that I have wisdom, you have wisdom, where do you get it from? Where'd you get your wisdom from? Well, we know, for example, the Gemara says, what does zokein mean? It's an abbreviation of zeh kana. He acquired. Zaken. Zeh kana. Zaken. He acquired. What did he acquire? Wisdom. Wisdom has to be acquired. How do you acquire wisdom? So the Gemara says you have to stand up. If you go in on a bus and there's a 65-year-old peddler, Arab, I don't know what, some kind of drunken Irishman, whatever it only be, walks into the bus or walks in the street, you have to stand up. That's the halacha. People, I notice the yeshiva, but certain halacha people don't know. You have to stand up. And if he's standing next to you, you can't sit until he moves further away out of your daladamas. You have to stand up, like standing in front of Chaim Shmulevitz. I have to stand in front of an alter goy. Even me here, an old man. Why? Because the Gemara says he didn't have any education. Kamar patke the adi alai. He had a lot of adventures in life. Equals, we see from here that chachma means you experience. The PhD in life of experience is called chachma, and that has to be. I'm going to have to decline that. And thank you. And that is the idea of what is that kind of chachma. So we have over here that so chachma means accumulation. How do I get my chachma? I accumulate. I live life. I go around things. Gemara, you learn. You experience a lot of learning. You utilize ideas. You have a decent search engine to be able to put all those experiences together. You get ideas. So what did you do? Your chachma is nothing more than accumulation of your experiences, in which afterwards you work them together and translate them into ideas. That's what you're doing. Take away your experiences, whether the experiences too much for one day. Okay, take away your experiences. You wouldn't have any chachma. That's true by the human being. The human being is nothing more than a bee, basically processing his experiences and translating them into intelligence and ideas, and then formulating them, and that's what you have is called chachma. What about God? God doesn't have experiences. God is a chachma from day one. The answer is chachma by him is not an experience which he experienced and processed, but is the expression of his self. Oh, look who's there. The chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the expression of the infinite self. That's what it is. So as opposed to my chachma, which is not an expression of myself, but rather of my processing capabilities of external experiences, by God, the chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is an expression of the inherent self. So when I look at the chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when I connect to an idea of Torah, I'm connecting to an expression of the inherent self of God, not of the experiences which he experienced. That's why we say that God and his Torah are one. What does it mean it's one? It is an expression of the inherent self. It's not an experience which he took from outside of himself and translated into intelligent thought. That's what he says over here. Torah and God are totally one. What does it mean? It means what I just told you. It doesn't mean we believe, so to speak, in the Trinity. Or Yisrael Chadu sounds like a Trinity. God, the Jews, and the Torah are one. That's terrible to say that. It means to say that the Raisa is the Chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is an expression of the inherent self, and that same Chachma, which is expressed in the Torah, is the Chachma, which is expressed in the creation of the Shemas of Jews. That same Chachma is expressed in Torah. That's you have wisdom, and a wisdom can be expressed in plastic arts, and it can be expressed in literature. You can be both a sculptor, a painter, a poet, and a playwright. Okay? The same wisdom is expressed in different disciplines. So that same Chachma of Elukus is expressed in the Bible, in the Torah, so it's expressed in the creation of the Shemas Yisrael. These are two different versions of the same idea, which are expressions of the inherent self of God. That's what these things mean. V'kasher Adam osek b'Torah. When a person is Isaac and Torah, ma'ayin heitev, and he thinks and he looks into it very well, lahavina dvarim lamitatam, a very big idea. You must look to try to understand the truth of the intent of the author, as opposed to, the evolving process of people sticking their nose into the Gemara, trying to figure out what the Gemara meant. What did the Gemara mean? What did the Rashba mean? What did the Ramban mean? But if you do that, if you try to understand Lamitas, what does that mean to say? It means there is an objective truth, and you try to understand. It's not the idea of a postmodern reality. Whatever I can read in it is what's there. He writes, no, you try to understand the intent of God. Now, obviously, we are limited. We are finite beings, and our capability of understanding Torah is basically very limited. And the best we can do is understand through the thinking process of the medieval scholars how they understood the ancient Babylonian and Jerusalem scholars, which we have no iota of how they thought. The best we can think about them is how the Rishonim understood. That's the closest we can get. And then we try to understand them. But the effort is to go off independently with my thought in 2025 without trying to find the truth as close as I can. That's a bit problematic, to say the least. That's not both. I can't decline that. Okay, so it's very clear that this is what's happening over here. That's what he says, La'ami. So if you do that, La'amita, what happens to you? You become one, you're in union with God and His will. We once discussed it. It's a mimer it's a Perik and Tanya, it's a mimer in Lakuta Torah of the Balatanya, where he literally writes that the greatest cleaving to God is not by davening, is not by learning Kabbalah and Chassidus, but dafka by learning Gemara and dafka Gemara be'iyun. Why? Because when you learn Kabbalah and Chassidus, you don't really understand the essence of things. The best you can understand, it's about some kind of you can understand the existence of ideas. But I can talk about infinity from today to tomorrow. Since I never experienced infinity, I can't really know what the essence of infinity is. I can talk about the infinite chesed v'kadosh baruch hu. I am a finite form and think in finite forms. How could I really grasp the idea of infinity? But I can, through my intelligent self, realize that there is an infinite source of finite. This I can understand. So in other words, I can be magdur the thing. I can describe. I can analyze the existence of certain ideas, but I can't experience the essence of the idea. The mahus I can't experience. When you learn there you understand good, not just the law, not just the existence of the principles. You can understand the essence of the principles. You can go down even to the social values, into the metaphysical values, into the philosophical underpinnings. You can really understand the mahus. He says, well, since learning Torah is cleaving to the wisdom of God, you understand that you're cleaving not just to the law, not just to the form, but also to the essence. You're cleaving to God is much profounder. He literally writes, there's no bigger dveikus in the Kadosh Baruch Hu than to understand the sugya with clarity and truth be'iyun. Would you believe it? Okay, that's the biggest dveikus in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, more than davening, more than any mitzvahs. And that's what he writes over here. And that's the goal of man. The goal of man is afterwards take that understanding and translate it into reality. Why do I say that? The goal is not just to think. The goal is translating that becomes your reality. This is Rambam. Rambam writes a famous letter to Ibn Tiba. Rambam writes, Ibn Tiba writes a letter to him. This actually, I once saw it was an article written by Professor Heschel, according to Levracha, and he bases it on a letter of the Rambam. I can quote the Rambam, since I first saw it as a child in a book of Professor Heschel, so I'm quoting him. Rambam says, don't come to me, I have no time. I spend all day healing people. I'm in the Sultan's court in Fustat, wherever it is over there in El Kahir. I finally come home. I have hordes of people, Jews, non-Jews, need help, and I'm healing them all day. The only time I have to learn is to say a shir between Mincha and Ma'ariv. That's when I say a shir in the shul. You understand he's saying Piskei Halachas. He's telling them probably Rambams. And then, and after I'm healing people again. So when do I have time to talk to you? So do me a favor, send me your questions. I'll try to see it. Ben Gavra LeGavra. There's no use of you coming, we won't meet. So Heschel points out, how can this be, this great scholar that wrote the Guide to Perplexed? How can it be that it deals totally with how man has to be a thinking man, and he basically spends most of his day doing actions of chesed? So he said that the answer lies in the last parak of Aaron Nevuchim. The last parak of Aaron Nevuchim, after doing all the beautiful scholarly, philosophical thinking, the Rambam starts discussing what does God want. He says, wants chesed, tzedakah, and mishpat. Ki be'ela chafatzti nu'um Hashem. And he explains at the end of the day, all the ideas are to funnel into a practical reality of living a moral, ethical life, interacting with the world and making a better world. So literally, it's unbelievable. So Professor Heschel pointed out that the man was living his speech. He took all his life of thought and translated it into something. You learn all that Vekas about Kadosh Baruch Hu, then translated it into healing someone, into helping someone, into creating a better economy for the country, or whatever it be. Can you imagine a person doing business because he wants to make a stronger society? It's a whole different ballpark. It's not just you're doing it for your values are being expressed in your day-to-day life. That's the goal of the whole spiel. So this is what he says. He's, of course, the biggest vacancy is the limud HaTorah, but it has to be limud HaMas Lasos. One has to understand that. Gemara said the person which is limud Mas Lasos. I want to say, it says a terrible thing on it. It says mutav sheis hapich sheyosei. It would have been better if he would have been aborted. One has to understand these things. By being dveikus in the Kadosh Baruch Hu, through this medium of limud HaTorah, that is so it's connected become incorporated. You're a walking thought machine of God's expression of thought. Hang be'asik on nigla the Torah. Whether you're talking about the asik of nigla Torah, this is the essence of his chachma, as we mentioned before. That's nigla. This is the chachma of Kadosh Baruch Hu. Decide shezeh kasher, v'zeh pasul. Whatever insight you will have, it all is what the Sinai. Now, what does that mean? You think that the inside Moshe Rabbeinu will recognize every shtickle Torah of Chaim Brisker? Give me a break. No, that's not what it means. We see that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't even chop that the drushes of Rabbi Akiva came from Sinai. The Gemara Menachos. The pshat is like this. It means that all these different versions and understandings lie in the primary source. And your idea of saying a chiddush or saying as far as is it true to the source? That's the pshat kol mashetamid vasik osad l'chadsh nitl l'moshe messina. Yes, obviously a person with a certain insight, with a certain dealing in a certain society, every person will have a different way of thinking. By the bare fact that I have to translate chassidus to people that don't know chassidus, I create new formulations, new ideas that the Rebbe Rashab wouldn't have had, because he didn't have the necessity of explaining it for that level and so on and so forth. So obviously that's what it means. This means all the halachas of Torah Sheba'al Peh, v'atamim, also the reason behind the halachas, v'asforas shebem, and the ideas behind them. Hakolu b'chinas chachmasi yisbarach mamish. Yes, if it's true, then it's chachmasi yisbarach mamish. If it's not true, it doesn't come from the text and leads to the text, it's not chachmasi yisbarach. And one deals with that and is Isaac in that, then he becomes incorporated one in this chachma. So that's as far as learning nigla is concerned. He continues, also the asik of pnimis haTorah, Kabbalah and Chassidus, which is not the mahus, but it's yediyah. That's Rashi yediyah v'asagas halukus. That we're trying to understand God. Anybody learning Chassidus, not Vertlach and Parshas Shavua, real Chassidus is trying to understand Seder, Ishtal Shalos, what does it mean by Idaber, by Yomer, when it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu? What does it mean, God? It's walls of books just to understand the concept. That's called Pnimis HaTorah. All of Kabbalah is that. All of Kabbalah is understanding Hazogas HaLukus. Shema Shegilu Lanu Rabbi Sen Zechen Levracha. Obviously, it's a deeper learning, but you don't have that. What you have is a very interesting idea. In Kabbalah and Chassidus, you can have a profounder idea, but you will have less of a connection to it. Because you will only, in that profound learning, you will only have a Yediyah Samusagim, you won't have Yediyah Samahus. The Niglas HaTorah is ready to be more of a practical reality. One would say it's less theoretical, it's more something less transcendent, more human, but you will have a stronger connection to it. So the Kamal of the Dveikus will be stronger in Nigla than in Nister because your cleaving to it will be profounder. Okay? So he says, so we have to understand that in order to have a total dveikus with Kadosh Baruch Hu, one has to have both. One has to have the profound cleaving, profound dveikus of Niglas HaTorah, because there you have the dveikus in the mahus of the Chachma. Although the Chachma is only a Chachma chitzaynis, because what is it? When we look at the halacha, the more you learn, the more you peel away the dimensions, and suddenly you see profound ideas there, which are more than just nigla. You have a whole pardes. So you're just learning a Mishnah. It's unbelievable. I once saw Kuntres which explains the first Amid Gemara Babatziah, the Pshat, Api Remez, Api Drush, and Api Sod. It's like unbelievable. This is mamash what the Gra writes. That the pshat, I need to know pshat, you also have to know Rembez, Drush, and Sod. And if the real pshat is if it fits with all the different levels, level A leads to B, B to C, C to D. That's how the Gra learned. That's what it's unbelievable to think about that. So that's there, okay? So when you learn Nigla without the Pneumius, what you have a external expression of a profound Chachma, but you have a profound cleaving to that external expression. When you learn Kabbalah, you have a shallower connection to a profounder aspect of the Chachma. So between the both, you get it all together. Outside of when you learn Chassidus or Kabbalah, not only is there a Maila that you are connecting to a profounder, deeper aspect of the Chachma Kadosh Baruch Hu, although I'm going to repeat again on the shallower form of cleaving, but there's another Maila, what it does to you as a person. The Ime Yoshi Zo Yediyas HaMetzias Levad, as pointed out before, you really don't know the essence. You only know the Metzius of these things because we can't know the essence of the infinite. You are talking and learning and thinking about a ruchnius idea which is not usually thought about. You start learning this be'ir, and you start seeing and feeling these things, although you don't know what it is, but you know it's there. And for you, these metaphysical ideas become, the more you learn it, it becomes more vivid and real, and you experience it. Once again, it's a shallower experience because you don't understand the essence of it. But most people live life without looking at essence, only at some kind of a connection, which is external. So you are starting to think, walk, and talk a very, very metaphysical reality. Once more the one learns these things, they become real and vivid, and he feels it, and you cleave to that emotionally, psychologically. So the cloud is the more you learn these things, you become a refined person because you start thinking in different ways. You look at a Shabbos, some people think Shabbos is for eating, reading the newspaper, and having a good kiddush. You know what I mean? But if you learn the essence of Shabbos and Chassidus, you begin to understand you're walking on clouds. It's another ballpark, and the more you learn these things, the more you experience that. And then next time you daven, you say something, you feel something totally different. It takes you out of your mundane reality. You become a refined person. First of all, you become refined internally. Ultimately, it changes all the things that you do in life. You suddenly feel less about yourself. You stop feeling, you don't feel about you you experience much more what things really are. That's an unbelievable truth. The more that we're used to thinking metaphysical ideas and these become vivid and real, your life is a different experience. Your work is a different experience. Not just your religious life, anything you do in life is a different experience. You know what it does? You stop focusing on taivas. When you start seeing things like that, can you imagine a person thinking only science all day, or a nutritionist, a person that lives nutrition? So he has no reason to go eating a sumptuous apple pie with custard. He realizes that's detrimental to his health. He realizes it's detrimental to his health. He's not going to even think about it. Ultimately, he won't think about it. Hopefully, if he's an intelligent, intellectually honest person, Nebuch people can be great physicists and great doctors, and yet die of heart attacks because they didn't live a healthy lifestyle. But if he's an intelligent person, that will become part of who he is. So he says basically, when we Isaac and Ruchnius, when we learn Chassidus, when we learn, we become much more refined. We start seeing things in a refined way. We start acting in a refined way. And you don't even want these taivas. So the first stage, we've learned two things so far. In the first two prakim, he taught us that the most stupidest thing is to run after sensuous pleasures. Next thing is taught us is that if you learn chachma, specifically chachmas elikus, you suddenly you have a different Welt and Shalom. You're not drawn to those things anymore. So when we say Barasi Yetzirah, Barasi Torah Tavlin, it doesn't mean you're going to learn Baba Kama. It's going to help you from Loisa Suach Lavavchem Barachra Einechem. But if learning Baba Kama will translate you into a metaphysical thinking person, into a refined person, that's what it's supposed to do, specifically with Pnimis HaTorah, that will be the antidote for Loisa Suach Lavavchem Barachra Einechem, Ashatem Zaynim Achreim, as we learned in the first year. The Rambam writes that is the issue of running after taivas. Rambam says before that the issue the Raisa Chinuch brings it down. The running after taivas aguf is Loisa Suach Lavavchem Barachra Einechem. Znus, and the Rambam writes in Sefer Mitzvahs, it's not just nus, but any sensual taivas are part of that love. Okay, have a great evening. Take care, and we will meet each other in 2 weeks.